Well, I just want to introduce myself a little bit more to you this morning before we get started. My name's Carrie Carter, and I have been in Bloom way back when. I have been a volunteer in Bloom, and now it's such a privilege for me to actually be on staff and lead this ministry every year and every week. But I wanted to introduce my family to you. We had the summer of milestones at our house this summer. We had a college graduation, followed by a wedding, followed by a high school graduation 3 weeks in a row, and multiple other things. But this is my family. This is the first time I've introduced my son-in-law to you guys. So on the left is my husband, Chuck. We've been married for 25 years. And then the bride is my oldest, Caroline. She is 22. And then that's her husband, Luke. And they live in Rogers, Arkansas. And then we'll just go to the end. My other daughter, that's our middle one, Annie. And she is at the University of Arkansas, a junior. And then the tall baby of the family is our son, Charlie. And he is 18 and a freshman at Oklahoma State. And so you will hear many stories about them. I don't know if I have permission to tell all the stories. So, if you know my kids and you see them, you go, oh, your mom told that story. Don't do that. They know some of the stories that I tell, but probably most of them. And then this next picture is probably where you'll hear equally as many stories. These are our dogs, Chip, the black and white, and Jasper. I promise he has eyes, even though you can't see him, the little black dog there. Those are our two dogs, and there's a lot of stories about them. So you may be hearing more about them. But as we begin our time together this year, I just wanted to share with you my prayer for Bloom. And every year, this is my prayer for each of you who are joining us in some form or fashion. I don't know if you know that this is not the only group we have. We also have a group that meets on Tuesday nights. So if you have a friend that maybe works and can't come to a Tuesday morning group and would love to jump into our Tuesday night group, please let them know. We'd love for them to jump in and do that. But my prayer for you is that you would be challenged, equipped, and encouraged to love God and His Word and to know both more personally. And then specifically regarding parenting this year, because that's what we're going to start with this fall, that the women of Bloom would have a confidence in their role as a mother to lead, disciple, discipline, and love their children in a way that honors God and, most importantly, points their hearts to Him. And that really is what I want for each one of us. Because I see so many moms, and you may be feeling this way, but so many moms who are scared that they're doing things wrong. Anybody? They worry about what they haven't done. They worry about what they aren't doing and that they're not going to do things perfectly. And what's drowning us all is this fear that we feel that says, if I don't do a good enough job as a mom, then my kids are not going to turn out well. You feel that, right? Yeah? I mean, we all do. And so right out of the gate, I want to tell you this, and you're going to hear me say this multiple times. If you've been in Bloom, you've heard me say this. There is no perfect mom. It doesn't feel that way when you look at Instagram. It doesn't feel that way when you scroll Facebook and you see the influencers and you see the people who look like they have it all together. The perfect mom does not exist. Now, you know that in your head. I know that in my head. But we still let our hearts believe that that should be our goal, that the perfect mom exists because we see it everywhere we look. But it's an illusion. Satan's biggest lie to you and to me is that we should, in our own strength and our own power and all the goodness and strength we can muster up, that we should be able to do this. And when we fall short, we feel like a failure. I mean, if you haven't felt that, then maybe you're sitting in this room still pregnant and your baby hasn't even been born yet. So if you're here this morning and you feel defeated and you feel like a failure as a mom and you feel inadequate, I want you to know you are in the right place. You are in the right place and you are not alone. And so I want you to see Bloom as a place that you can come, you can feel safe. You can come in I prefer that you not come in your PJs, but just whatever with spit up on you and your hair up in a ponytail and show up. It doesn't matter. Because as you have probably had those feelings of being a failure, guess what? The mom next to you, she's probably had those same feelings. And the mom next to her and the mom next to her. Now, I'm not saying that we should just kind of throw in the towel and say, oh, well, we're all failures. We just can't do anything right. That's not what I'm talking about. Because that's exactly what Satan wants. He wants to make us think that we can do it all, and then he wants to watch us crash and burn. Because his purpose behind these feelings of guilt and shame and inadequacy is that first we would be focused on ourselves. That we would be focused on what a terrible job we're doing. And that second, we would continue to keep ourselves at the center, thinking if I just try harder, if I just get up earlier, if I'm just more consistent. He wants us to think that the answer is doing better, doing more, and just trying harder. But that is not how God would speak to that pressure that you and I feel to become a perfect mom. And so when we recognize those feelings of guilt and shame and just those feelings of failure rise up, what are we going to do? Well, God would have us recognize it and reframe it for what it is. See, the purpose of those emotions is not to make us feel horrible about ourselves. The purpose of those emotions and those feelings is for those to be the things that actually drive us to God. Not drive us to try harder, do better, do more, but that they would drive us to dependence on God. To turn and look at Jesus every day and say, this is too big for me. Motherhood is big, guys. It's a heavy weight, and you know that. And so those days where you feel like, I can't do this. I hate to break it to you, but you're right. And so Jesus wants us to turn to him and say, this is too big for me. I can't do this, and I need you to do it through me. And if that sounds kind of weird to you, hang with us this year because we're going to continue to teach you what that means and what that looks like. But I want you to see what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 9 and 10. It's up on the screen for you. But he, Jesus, said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect, not in strength. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses. That's not very intuitive. I delight in insults. I delight in hardships and in persecutions and in difficulties, because when I am weak, then I'm strong. Not because of me, but because of Jesus in me. And so remember, the Bible is full of these paradoxes, that the weak would become strong. So let's spend a second here to see what this means for us as moms. When we realize that we are weak, and we come to the point where we can actually embrace that that's actually a good thing, when culture's telling us that that's the worst thing that could happen to you, then we quit expecting ourselves to do it all. We quit expecting ourselves to be this perfect super mom, and we allow ourselves to turn to Jesus and say, help me. And then guess what happens? He begins to shine through us. And now, instead of our kids seeing us, they begin to see Jesus through us. Isn't that what we want? Because if we're perfect like we think we need to be, and we meet all of our kids' needs, and we are the absolute perfect mom for them, then they have no need for anybody else other than us, right? They have no need for Jesus because we've taken up all the space. We've met all the needs. We haven't given them reason to look beyond us. But when we are weak, God's power is made perfect in us. And so when we're weak, when we lose it and yell at our kids, then we can be strong because we can show them how Jesus offers forgiveness and we all need it. And when we don't know how we're going to make it through the hard season that we're in, then we're strong because we can show our kids how God provides for us in every circumstance. And when our kids fall short, instead of losing our patience, we can extend grace to them, just like Jesus extended his grace to us. So when we are weak, then he is strong. So that's my challenge to you as a mom, for you to see your inadequacy in kind of a new light. And instead of seeing it as a shortcoming, to see it as a blessing. So when you feel like you're falling short this week, instead of focusing on yourself, instead of focusing on you could have done better, you could have tried harder, reframe your focus to say, yes, God, of course I'm falling short. I cannot do this on my own. Thank you that now my kids have the opportunity to see my need for you and their need for you today. And then you just pray, man, 2 words. These will get you through a lot of things. Lord, help. If that's all you can remember to pray, it works. And then we model to our kids what it means to depend on God. And that's the gospel, isn't it? That's the Christian life. We could actually just boil it down to 4 words. I can't, Jesus, help. Like that is the story of the gospel. We cannot do this on our own, but Jesus can. And if you've never said those words, if you've never put your heart and your life under the authority of Jesus and made him the Lord of your life rather than yourself, man, I would love to talk to you about that. Your small group leader would love to talk to you about that. Because the Bible tells us that the yoke or the burden of Jesus is light. That his yoke is easy. And so that's my prayer for you today, that you wouldn't feel guilt and shame, but that you would be able to boast in your weaknesses, because through our weaknesses, Jesus can shine through. So welcome to Bloom. I'm so glad that you're here. We're going to have a great year together. I want to give you a quick overview of our year, and then we're going to get started right in on our parenting study called Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World. And if you have not bought this book, you need to do it, okay? Soon, ASAP, so it can be coming to your house. Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World by Kristen Welch. We're going to be spending the fall going through this book, and then in the spring, we are going to do a shorter series called Almost True, talking about common lies that have crept into Christianity and church culture. I think that's going to be a really fun series. And then we'll spend the rest of our spring with our marriage study called Extraordinary Marriage, where we're going to look at the nitty-gritty, everyday topics that come up in marriage and talk about how we can deal with those ordinary things so that the result is extraordinary. I'm really excited about this year and what God has in store for us, but I'd like to do something for just a minute before we get started in our parenting series. And that is, I want to give you a minute to think intentionally about why you're here this year. Why did you show up today? Why did you register for Bloom? And I told you my prayer for Bloom this year, and I just want to give you a minute to just sit there at your spot. Maybe you open your book, maybe it's the front or the back cover or somewhere in there. And I would love for you to just take a minute and just write out what you're hoping and praying for this year, what you're praying that God would teach you, what you're hoping that you learn this year, to where at the end of the bloom, you would be able to say, this is what God did in my heart, in my life, and in our family this year. So I'm going to give you just a minute or two of quiet and let you write. All right, you may still be writing, but I'm going to let you continue to think about that and finish that later today. Don't forget to come back to that. It will be important for you as you go through this year. I want to pray for us, and then we're going to get started into our parenting study. God, we just come before you. We are so incredibly thankful that when we are weak, you are strong. God, would you just help reframe our hearts and our minds to not seek to be strong on our own, God. That is so ingrained in us that that's what we should be doing, God. But would you help us recognize that our weakness is a blessing because it forces us to depend on you. God, we're so thankful for that. I pray for today, I pray for this year that you would teach us, that you would teach us more about yourself, God, more about your word and how it applies to our hearts and to our families. And God, would you just transform us this year to be better moms, to be better wives, to be just more in love with you and more like you. God, we love you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, well, let's get started in parenting. I think you guys are going to love this book. If you haven't done this book before, it speaks so well to our culture today, and it has some great practical tools no matter how old your kids are. And what I want to do today is spend some time just laying a foundation for you as you begin to dig into this book. So today is really just going to be a setup for the weeks to come. And the way this study is going to work is I promise you're going to be confused at some point this year. You're going to be like, am I supposed to be reading chapter 5 this week, or am I supposed to be reading chapter 6 this week? Okay? We're always going to read the chapter after the teaching. So this is week 1 of Bloom. So after today, you're going to read the introduction and chapter 1. Okay? So week 2, after that, you'll read chapter 2. You've got a calendar in your book. Hopefully that keeps you on track. But you're going to have a chapter a week that would be great for you to read. And if it's easier for you to listen, then get the audio book, okay? But don't miss what this book has to offer. But what I want to start with this morning is how the Urban Dictionary defines entitlement, okay? Entitlement is when someone thinks that they are owed something by life, and they have the notion that things should be given to them for free because of who they are. Now, I know that none of you are envisioning any specific one of your children right now as I say that, but maybe you're not clearly identifying entitlement in your house. And you're like, yeah, I mean, our culture's entitled, and that's just kind of a general thing, but we got to get specific here. So let me give you some more examples, because the first step in solving a problem is admitting that we have a problem, right? If you don't think your kids are entitled, like, just take them to the grocery store with you. Shopping. I mean, and it doesn't matter how old they are. I hate to tell you that, but like, even, my teenagers, college kids, if they go to the store with me, I mean, there's stuff appearing in my basket that I don't even know where it came from. So, according to John Townsend, author of The Entitlement Cure, entitlement encompasses two attitudes. First, I'm exempt from responsibility. And second, I am owed special treatment. Okay, I'm exempt from responsibility and I'm owed special treatment. In other words, I don't have to pull my own weight and I should be treated differently. Anybody recognize that in their home? In her book, The Me Epidemic, author Amy McCready gives us some other signs that maybe our kids might be entitled. They expect bribes or rewards for good behavior. Rarely lift a finger to help. They're more concerned about themselves than others. They pass blame when things go wrong. They can't handle disappointment. They have to have a treat in order to get through the store. They expect to be rescued from their mistakes instead of pay the consequences. They feel like the rules don't apply to me. And they constantly want more and more and more and more. Now, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, okay? I promise. Because, every single one of our, if you're feeling worried about your kids, don't. Because every single one of our kids does all these things, right? But I want you to begin to just see it. I want you to begin to see that for what it is. Because it's not just in our kids, it's in us as well, right? We want more. We sometimes think the rules don't apply to us. We have a hard time handling disappointment. We pass the blame when things go wrong. And here's the deal, we don't plan to become self-centered and entitled. Nobody looks at their sweet little 6-month-old and says, man, I'm going to do my best to raise you entitled and self-centered. Nobody plans to do that. But we are. We're doing it without even realizing it. And so that's what this semester is going to be about. So where did this problem of entitlement come from? Well, the entitlement that lives within each one of us really has two parts. Because first we have a spiritual problem. If we look in the Bible, entitlement appears right out of the gate in the Garden of Eden. God told Adam and Eve that they could eat from any tree in the garden. And which one did they choose? The one that he said not to. Just like your toddler, when you say, don't touch that one thing in the house, what do? They go right over to it. They had everything they could possibly need. In life, guess what? It was not just perfect like we say, things are perfect. No, it was actually perfect. Life for them was actually perfect, but Satan came along and he said to Eve, are you sure that's really what God meant? Are you sure you can't try that? And so Eve began to think, I deserve this. God's rules don't apply to me. And so she disobeyed God and sin entered the world. And you can see elements of entitlement throughout the Bible. In the story of the prodigal son, we see a son who felt entitled to his inheritance. In the story of King David, we see the king who felt like he was entitled to another man's wife. And we even see it in the disciples as they argued over who was the most important. But still, the entitlement problem was not quite the monster that it is now. And if you ask your parents or your grandparents about the things that they had when they were growing up, or the jobs that they had to work, the ways that they just had to survive, you would hear all the stories of the things that they didn't have and how hard it was and how they had to walk 2 miles in the snow uphill both ways to get anywhere, right? So this is not only a spiritual problem that started back in the Garden of Eden, but it's also a cultural problem. In the U.S. in the 1960s, there was a major shift in our parenting philosophy. And it was a shift from an adult-centered parenting approach to a child-centered approach. Because the experts said that this approach was going to actually empower children, and it was going to improve their self-esteem. And so we shouldn't tell our kids no anymore. We should just redirect them. And at kids' sporting events, let's not keep score. Let's just play. And at the end, everybody will get a trophy. At school, everyone in the class gets a certificate for the teacher for something. And everyone just gets told how wonderful they are all the time. Now hear me. I'm not talking down about all of these things. There are some good things. There are great ways that we can reward kids. But when we begin to tell our kids how wonderful they are and how amazing they are, when really they didn't do anything, it's confusing to them. And so instead of boosting their self-esteem, it's hurting it because they're confused. They've been told they're great at everything, but they don't really feel successful at anything. They've been given rewards without earning them. And the problem is when they get out into the real world, they start failing. And they don't know what to do with it. And so we're going to talk more about this child-centered approach in a couple of weeks. But the bottom line right now is this approach is not working. And so we have this cultural problem layered on top of the spiritual problem. But if we want to really get to the root of the problem, then we got to dig a little deeper. And this is where it gets a little bit painful. Because the root of the problem is pride. You see, in our culture, we're not really teaching a healthy self-esteem. What we're teaching is pride disguised as self-esteem. Think about it, because it's subtle, but we're taught to build up our kids, to only give them positive reinforcement, to reward them for everything, to protect them from harm and mistakes. Entitlement is normal in a young child. It's part of the immaturity of who they are. But we have failed to help them mature out of that. And rather, we're reinforcing it by putting them and their needs, but really even more than that, more than just what they need, putting their wants and their desires at the center. And what it leads to is pride. And spiritually, we continue to put ourselves at the center of our lives, effectively worshiping ourselves and our own desires and our own success. So the root of this spiritual problem is pride. And the root of this cultural problem is pride. And ironically, if you look at the word pride, what's the center letter? It's I. I love the way one of our pastors at Midtown, Tim Caldwell, put it in his sermon once. He said, when we fail to put God first, we become numb to his importance and his rightful place in our lives. And so when you begin to feel numb about who God is and what he has done for you, it's a red flag that you've quit putting him at the center. And when that supreme place in our hearts that should be occupied by God is now vacant, something has to move up to fill it. And it's us. It's our own selves. It's me. It's pride. And it's the number one problem in our lives and even more so in our hearts. So what are we going to do? Well, James 4:10 gives us the answer. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Philippians 2:3-4 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of others. Now, the word humble means having or showing a modest opinion of one's own importance. I can promise you that's not what we're teaching our kids today. I'm guilty of this too. Our culture of entitlement says, I must increase and everyone around me must decrease. I'm the important one. But the Bible tells us in John 3:30, it says, he must increase, meaning Jesus. He must increase and I must decrease. Matthew 23:11 and 12 tells us that the greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So we solve the problem of pride by developing hearts of humility. It's so counterintuitive. But once our hearts become humble, then it becomes easier to solve the entitlement problem because the attitude that flows out of a humble heart is gratefulness. Don't you want your kids to be grateful? That's the attitude that flows out of a humble heart. Now, gratefulness is similar to thankfulness, but they're a little bit different. We tend to use those words interchangeably, but gratefulness really goes a little bit deeper. Thankfulness is what we do. We give thanks. We tell someone thank you. But gratefulness is who we are. It's our character. It's a heart attitude that says, you know what? I know I don't deserve any of this, and so I am so grateful for what I have. The attitude of gratefulness is marked by humility. You can't have gratefulness without humility. So if we want to solve the entitlement problem in our homes, then we need to intentionally be doing something different. Something that is counter to the culture, that doesn't jive with what the experts tell us. We have to reestablish a standard of humility in our hearts and in our homes. And out of that humility, we then can begin to cultivate this attitude of gratefulness, both in ourselves and in our children. So that brings me to our final question. How in the world do we do that? And that is what we're going to spend this semester talking about. And that is what this book talks about. And so to get the answer, you need to start reading this week. Don't skip the introduction. There's a lot of good stuff in there. So read the introduction and read chapter 1 this week. And then as you show up next week, and if you don't get to, I really want you to read the book. But I don't want you to not come because you didn't read the book. Okay? Come back next week, and the week after that, and the week after that with gratefulness, not greatness. Okay? If you come back with greatness, like we got extra work to do. Come back with gratefulness and with humility and with a heart that is willing to go back and say those 4 words. I can't, Jesus, help. Let me pray first. God, thank you again for who you are. God, we look forward in anticipation to what you have to teach us this year. How you would reframe our hearts and our minds around this concept of humility and gratefulness, of weakness and strength. God, would you just begin to work on our hearts, strip away things that we have bought into and believed that don't line up with how you would have us live, with how you would have us parent. And God, just teach us. I thank you for these women. I pray for each one of them, God. Thank you that they're here. Thank you that you brought them here. And I just ask that you would work in their hearts in a way that's beyond what they could imagine this year. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen.